Hi there, my name is Reagan Finch, and if you couldn't tell by the fact that I chose to do a video for my midterm, I am a VMA major. So for my midterm, I chose to talk about in class we were talking about sort of the rise of concept albums, and I wanted to talk about not only the rise, but what they've become today and how they've really evolved since when we first started talking about them. So without further ado, what is a concept album? A concept album is an album that has some sort of unity throughout the entire project. It could either be lyrically or it tells a story like a narrative or something like that. Basically, it's the type of album that you'd listen to fully in order instead of picking certain songs off of it for a playlist. But Reagan, what was the first concept album? Reagan, I'm so glad you've asked that question. The first concept album that's widely recognized is Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl Ballads. It was released in 1940 by Victor Talking Machine Records. Now, what you and I understand as a concept album with a storyline or an overarching narrative isn't exactly what happens in this album. Instead, it's the first album where he's really talking about the same subject in all the same songs. The subject being the Dust Bowl. The album talks about... Love how my fridge decides to be loud right when I'm filming. The album talks about the Dust Bowl's impact on the US, not only the country itself, but also the people that were affected firsthand, farmers. One of the most popular songs off of this album is a cover, actually, Do Re Mi.
Across the desert sands they roll, getting out of that old dust bowl. They think they're going to a sugar bowl, but here's what they find.
Dust Bowl Ballads was widely considered Guthrie's greatest hit in terms of his albums. It was his most successful, definitely. And he really pioneered the concept album movement, because if he didn't, who knows how concept albums would have started. Moving on. Hey, do you like the 60s? If so, you are gonna love this part of the video. The 60s has a lot of concept albums that I could spend all day talking about, but I really want to focus on two that I think are super important. Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, and my personal favorite, Pet Sounds. I have a bit of an attachment to Pet Sounds. I listened to it with my dad as a kid. Music and lyrics, the 2015 biopic about Brian Wilson, is me and my dad's comfort movie. I love the Beach Boys. Me and my dad love the Beach Boys. Pet Sounds is an album by the Beach Boys. It was released in 1966 by Capitol Records. Brian Wilson has always been kind of the brains behind the Beach Boys, even though there's no inherent leader because three of them are all brothers. Brian Wilson was basically the music behind the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys go on tour in 65, and Brian Wilson really does not want to go with them. He's not into it, doesn't love touring, and he thinks he can start crafting an album while they're gone, make use of their time, so the Beach Boys say, okay, go on tour without Brian. Pet Sounds is born. As we talked about earlier, Wilson works with Phil Spector and his house band, The Working Crew, to make Pet Sounds, and he really got experimental with all the sounds. You can hear sleigh bells, dog barks, all kinds of different sound effects that the Beach Boys have never even tapped into before.
I may not always love you.
They not only got crafty with the sound effects, they also got really interesting with the lyrics. Wilson's talking about depression, a lot of very serious subjects that wasn't really tapped into before with their we love the surf, we love the sand kind of sound. The album did not do well commercially at first. It was not their best selling album, but it's grown because people have realized the genius behind it and how it's really not a trendsetter, but more of a trailblazer in its kind. I love Pet Sounds. I love Wouldn't It Be Nice? God only knows. Sloop John B, come on, people! I wanna go home. I wanna go home. Yeah. Alright, fine. Let's talk about the Beatles. Sgt Pepper is the Beatles' 8th studio album, and it really takes them from the four-piece rock band that they used to be into the musical geniuses that everybody considers them to be now. The album dropped in 1967, and it is an extreme left turn from the I Wanna Hold Your Hand stuff that we're used to from the band from Britain. The band took a lot of inspiration from other types of music from other countries. For instance, Within You, Without You is their attempt at paying an homage to Indian music, which is very interesting, and once again, very different from anything they've done before.
hide themselves behind the wall of illusion.
In a day in a life when they have that absolutely chaotic orchestra moment. Love! Love! In a quote from Paul McCartney, he once said that Sgt. Pepper itself didn't appear until halfway through making the album. It was Paul's song, it was just an ordinary rock number, but when we had finished it, Paul said, why don't we make the album as though the Pepper Band really did exist, and as though Sgt. Pepper was making the record. We'll dub the effects and things. Similar to Pet Sounds, the band has a lot of different effects and just really branched out from the normal shit that they make. Sgt. Pepper is a great album, and I like it. I don't know that much about the Beatles, but I do like this album, so yeah! As I said earlier, these are not the only concept albums that came out in the 60s. Ray Charles with The Genius Hit the Road. Mothers of Invention came out with Freak Out. Tommy by The Who. So good! But those are the only two I'm going to focus on from the 60s because they're what we talked about in class. Now here's the part where I'm going to venture out a bit. I know we've only covered up to the 70s, but there's a bunch of more concept albums that came out after the 70s that I think are really good and I'm going to talk about because I think they're super important. Yay! Back in good old Tampa, Florida over the summer, I manage a kids film camp, and one week we have this repeat camper that comes in. His name's Daniel. And Daniel, out of nowhere, wants to make a recreation of the 50-minute documentary of Pink Floyd's The Wall, which is great, but we make 5-minute iMovie videos. So we were like, Daniel, this is impossible. I had also never seen Pink Floyd's The Wall. So, all week, this kid was like, have you ever heard The Wall? Hey, have you ever heard Pink Floyd's The Wall? Have you ever heard The Wall? But after hearing this 14-year-old blabber about it for 5 whole days, I finally decided, fine, I'll watch it, and man, do I understand the hype now. Alright, let's talk about The Wall. Pink Floyd's The Wall was released in 1979 under Columbia Records. It's considered to be Pink Floyd's last great work. It's one of the best-selling double albums of all time, and it really had a serious impact on music culture. The album is biographical in a sense, in that it really draws on Roger Waters, the bassist of Pink Floyd's life. It talks about a rock singer who is struggling with a lot of different emotions, dealing with the death of his dad, which lines up with Waters because his dad passed away in World War II. It was huge. They got to play The Wall on the Berlin Wall. Double wall. What? And overall, it's just a great album. Back when I was a little kid, young boy, my dad took me into the city one time to go and see a marching band. The Black Parade was a prime part of my tween to teenage years. I would be a completely different person if I had never listened to that album. Is that a good thing? Who knows? Personally, not my favorite My Chemical Romance album. I'm more of a Three Cheers girl myself. However, album totally transformed the emo scene and really defined a generation of alternative kids. The Black Parade, other than being an album of my childhood, was a rock opera that came out in 2006. Arguably my Chemical Romance's biggest hit. I mean, Welcome to the Black Parade, Teenagers, Mama, The Sharpest Lies. I could really go on for a very, very long time. This concept album actually has more of a narrative than the rest that are kind of united by blind, abstract topics. This one actually tells the narrative of the patient who is slowly dying of cancer. It talks about his death, his experiences in the afterlife, and then reflecting back on your life after you died. Very interesting album. 7th grade me was really transformed. I had a fan account for My Chemical Romance when I was a kid called Danker Days instead of Danger Days. Do you see what I did there? Now moving on to our final album. My favorite album. Excuse me. To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. I'm in my sweet mate's room and I'm wearing a cowboy hat to really shake things up for the finale. To Pimp a Butterfly is a rap album that came out in 2015 by the greatest want to say, but the greatest, Kendrick Lamar. Unlike his last album, Good Kid, Bad City, which followed an extremely linear narrative where you could actually tell the story that was going on, this one's more united, like other albums that we saw, with loose constructs, except it's really put together in this really beautiful way. Throughout different parts of the album, you can see Kendrick rereading this poem. I remember he was conflicted with using an influence, and slowly, song by song, lyric by lyric, he starts to build up this poem, until at the end of the poem, he reads the entire thing, you realize he's reading it to, spoilers, Tupac. What? Genius! The original name of the album was actually To Pimp a Caterpillar. T-P-A-C, Tupac. But that was two people caught on to that too fast, so it's To Pimp a Butterfly.
To Pimp a Butterfly. At first I did love you, but I just wanna fuck.
The album's personally my favorite concept album, and really anytime I'm on a flight, it's the only album I have downloaded, so I will listen to it fully. Concept albums are insane. You can get unbelievably creative with them. You can talk about anything you want, and I just think they're so cool. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Take care. Peace, love, faith, trust, and pixie dust.